cruel laughter echoed through the St. Regis ballroom. Dozens of men in bespoke tuxedos pointed at Fiona, mocking her weight, her dress, her existence. She wished the marble floor would swallow her. Then Manhattan's most feared criminal stepped out of the shadows, silencing the room to ask her one question. Fiona Hayes had spent 28 years apologizing for the space she occupied. She was a brilliant forensic accountant, a woman who could unravel a tangled web of Cayman Island shell companies and encrypted Swiss bank transfers faster than a supercomputer. But in the polished, predatory world of Manhattan, high finance, her intellect was merely a tool for others to exploit. To the partners at her elite accounting firm, she was the invisible workhorse. To the junior executives, she was the punchline to a joke she was never allowed to hear. She was a size 20 in a sea of size 2 debutantes, navigating a corporate culture that equated thinness with competence and beauty with worth, until Derek Lawton noticed her. Derek was the firm's golden boy, a junior partner with a jawline carved from marble and a pedigree that included Yale Hampton's estate and a trust fund he loved to complain about. For 6 months, he had been leaning against Fiona's cubicle, bringing her oat milk lattes and complimenting her sharp mind. He had breached the fortress of her insecurities with weaponized charm. When he invited her to the annual Gold and Onyx Charity Gala, the most exclusive event of the financial season, Fiona had wept in the privacy of her tiny Brooklyn apartment. She believed foolishly, desperately, that the invisible barrier had finally shattered. She believed a man like Derek actually saw her. She had decimated her savings for tonight. She had commissioned a custom emerald green silk gown, tailored meticulously to hug her curves and flow elegantly to the floor. She spent 3 hours in a salon, getting her dark, heavy curls styled into a classic Hollywood wave. When she looked in the mirror, before leaving for the first time in her life, Fiona didn't see a woman who needed to hide. She saw a woman who belonged. The Astor Ballroom at the St. Regis, New York, was a dizzying spectacle of wealth. Crystal baccarat chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the city's elite. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of Veuve Clicquot and beluga caviar. Derek had greeted her with a dazzling smile, kissed her cheek, and guided her through the crowd, with a hand resting lightly on the small of her back. For 45 minutes, it was a fairy tale. Then Derek excused himself to get them fresh drinks. When he didn't return after 20 minutes, Fiona's anxiety began to simmer. The heavy silk of her gown suddenly felt like armor she was sweating through. Navigating through the sea of socialites, she caught a glimpse of Derek's platinum Patek Philippe watch near the French doors leading out to the private terrace. She stepped toward the heavy velvet curtains, a smile forming on her lips, ready to surprise him. The smile died before she ever reached the glass. Derek was standing on the terrace with Carter and Liam, two of the firm's most notorious finance bros, clutching Scotch glasses and laughing so hard they were leaning against the stone balustrade for support. "I can't believe you actually pulled it off, Lawton," Carter gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "I was certain she'd back out. I mean, look at her. She looks like a velvet sofa." Fiona froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin ice-cold despite the suffocating heat of the ballroom behind her. "Hey, a bet is a bet." Derek's voice drifted through the partially open door, stripped of all its usual warmth, dripping with arrogant amusement. "You owe me 50 grand, Carter. I told you I could get the office whale to parade around in a ball gown." Liam snorted into his drink. "God, how did you even pretend to be interested? She's massive. Did you actually have to touch her?" "Barely," Derek scoffed, taking a sip of his Macallan. "A few coffees, some fake interest in her boring forensic audits. It was entirely transactional. Plus, the desperate cow did my quarterly compliance reports for free for the last 3 months. I call that a double win. I win the pig run bet, and I get free labor. Fiona couldn't breathe. The air in her lungs turned to glass. The pig run. It was a cruel, legendary frat house game she had read about in college, where arrogant men bet on who could bring the most unattractive or overweight woman to a party. She hadn't been invited to a gala. She had been brought as a circus act. She was the punchline. Blindly acting purely on the adrenaline of absolute devastation, Fiona pushed the glass door open. It hit the stone wall with a loud ringing crack. The three men spun around. Derek's smug smile vanished, replaced instantly by a flash of genuine panic, followed quickly by defensive irritation. "Penny!" Derek said, his voice dropping an octave. "What are you doing out here?" $50,000, Fiona whispered. Her voice was shaking so violently she could barely form the words. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and humiliating. "I was a $50,000 bet." Carter and Liam looked away awkwardly, clearing their throats, but Derek's panic morphed into cruel resentment. He hated being caught, and he hated feeling guilty over someone he deemed beneath him. "Oh, come on, Fiona," Derek sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He stepped forward, no longer bothering to hide his disdain. "Don't play the victim. Look at you. Look at me." He gestured between them, his eyes raking over her body with visceral disgust. "Did you honestly, truly think a guy like me would be on a real date with a woman who looks like you? Be realistic." The cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. Fiona stumbled back. She bumped into a waiter behind her, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. The shattering of glass silenced the immediate vicinity. The music seemed to fade. The entire terrace and the adjacent ballroom turned to look. Dozens of people. Elite, beautiful, thin people. Derek, realizing he had an audience, decided to lean into the cruelty rather than retreat. "It was charity, Penny," he sneered loudly, making sure his friends could hear. "Consider it a favor. Now you have a fun story to tell your cats." Laughter rippled through the crowd. It started small, a snicker from Liam, a chuckle from a blonde socialite in Valentino, and then it grew. Dozens of men and women, masked by their wealth, began to point and whisper. The humiliation was absolute. Fiona stood trapped in her beautiful green dress, the weight of their mockery crushing her spine, wishing she could simply cease to exist. From the elevated VIP balcony overlooking the terrace, Riker Castellano watched the scene unfold with eyes as cold as dead stars. Riker was 34, impeccably dressed, in a tailored midnight blue Tom Ford suit, and undeniably lethal. Officially, he was the CEO of Castellano Holdings, a massive venture capital firm that owned a startling percentage of Manhattan real estate. Unofficially, he was the ruthless, uncontested head of the Castellano Syndicate, a man who controlled the eastern seaboard's underworld with an iron fist. He did not attend charity galas to socialize. He attended to identify the weaknesses of his enemies. He had been watching Derek Lawton for weeks. Derek was a low-level parasite, a fool who had been laundering dirty money for a rival Russian faction through his accounting firm. But Riker hadn't been looking at Derek tonight. His gaze had been fixed on the woman in the emerald gown. Riker knew exactly who Fiona Hayes was. His hackers had breached her firm's servers a month ago, looking for Derek's ledgers. In the process, Riker had discovered Fiona's digital footprint. He had spent hours reading her financial audits, mesmerized by the sheer, terrifying brilliance of her mind. She saw patterns in numbers that his own cartel accountants couldn't comprehend. She was a savant. And tonight, watching her walk into the ballroom, Riker had found himself captivated by something else, her soft, fierce beauty, the elegant curve of her hips, the quiet dignity in her dark eyes. Now watching that dignity be shredded by a worthless, arrogant boy, a dark, violent rage ignited in Riker's chest. He did not tolerate cruelty directed at things he valued, and he had already decided weeks ago that Fiona Hayes's mind belonged to him. Riker set his crystal glass down. He gestured to Matteo, his heavily scarred enforcer, standing in the shadows. "Clear a path." Riker ordered, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that promised violence. Down on the terrace, Fiona was paralyzed. The laughter felt like acid raining down on her skin. She couldn't find the strength to walk away. Her legs felt like lead. Derek was still smirking, basking in the approval of his peers, reveling in his own perceived superiority. Suddenly the laughter in the ballroom began to die. It didn't just fade, it was extinguished, strangled by a sudden suffocating shift in the atmosphere. The crowd parted, stepping back so quickly that several people tripped over their own expensive hemlines. The murmurs of mockery turned into hushed gasps of genuine terror. Riker Castellano walked onto the terrace. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a panther, his towering frame dominating the space. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. Matteo flanked him, a silent executioner, but nobody was looking at the bodyguard. They were staring at Riker, the Phantom King of New York, a man whose mere presence was enough to send powerful politicians fleeing the room. Riker ignored the crowd. He ignored Carter and Liam, who were suddenly trembling. He walked straight past a visibly paling Derek Lawton and stopped right in front of Fiona. Up close, he was devastating. Sharp, aristocratic features, a hard jaw covered in dark stubble, and eyes the color of obsidian. He looked down at Fiona, taking in the tears threatening to spill over her dark lashes, the way her chest heaved with suppressed sobs, the magnificent way the emerald silk draped over her curves. He reached out. Slowly, deliberately, in front of Manhattan's elite, Riker removed a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and gently wiped a stray tear from Fiona's cheek. The touch of his leather-gloved thumb against her skin sent a jolt of pure electricity straight down her spine. "Are you going to cry over a dead man, Miss Hayes?" Riker asked. His voice carried over the dead silence of the terrace. It was smooth, dark, and terrifyingly calm. Fiona stared up at him, her breath hitching. What?" she whispered. Derek, desperate to salvage his reputation and completely misunderstanding the situation, stepped forward. "Mr. Castellano." Derek stammered, his voice cracking. "I apologize for the disturbance. This woman was just leaving. She's nobody." Riker didn't turn his head. He merely shifted his eyes to Derek. It was a look of such absolute, predatory malice that Derek actually choked on his own breath and stumbled backward. "If you speak again in her presence—" "Lawton," Riker said, quietly, the menace dripping from every syllable, "I will have Matteo cut out your tongue and feed it to the stray dogs in the Bronx. Do you understand me?" Derek turned the color of ash. He nodded frantically, his arrogance entirely evaporated, replaced by the pathetic, trembling coward he truly was. Carter and Liam had physically pressed themselves against the stone wall, trying to become invisible. Riker turned his attention back to Fiona. The coldness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a dark, intense warmth that made Fiona's heart hammer wildly against her ribs. He unbuttoned his custom Tom Ford suit jacket, slipped it off his broad shoulders, and draped it carefully over Fiona, enveloping her in the scent of cedarwood expensive cologne and danger. "You are a creature of magnificent intellect, Fiona," Riker said softly, ensuring only she could hear the reverence in his tone. "And you look breathtaking tonight. Do not let the opinions of sheep dictate the worth of a lioness." He offered her his arm. "Walk with me." Fiona didn't hesitate. For the first time in her life, she didn't think about her weight, her size, or the whispers of the room. She looked at the terrified faces of the men who had just humiliated her, placed her trembling hand into the crook of Riker Castellano's arm, and let the most dangerous man in the city lead her away. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. No one dared to breathe, let alone laugh, as Riker escorted her out of the street, Regis out into the cool Manhattan night, and into the back of a waiting armored Maybach. As the heavy door thudded shut, sealing them in the luxurious, soundproof interior, Piona finally exhaled a shaky breath. She looked at the ruthless Mafia Boss sitting beside her in the dim light of the cabin. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "And why did you do that?" Riker poured 2 glasses of Macallan 25 from the car's crystal decanter, handing her one. His dark eyes locked onto hers with a fierce, possessive intensity. "My name is Riker Castellano," he replied, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the leather seats. "And I did it because I have a proposition for you, Miss Hayes. A mutually beneficial arrangement. I need the smartest forensic accountant in the world to dismantle the financial empires of my enemies." He leaned closer, the proximity making her pulse race. "Work for me, Piona. Give me your brilliant mind, and in return I will give you the world." He paused, a cruel, beautiful smile touching the corner of his lips. "And I will systematically, completely, and legally destroy every single thing Derek Lawton loves." Morning sunlight bathed the penthouse suite of Castellano Tower, catching the gold accents of the massive mahogany desk where Piona now commanded her empire. It had been exactly 3 weeks since the night at the St. Regis. 3 weeks since Riker Castellano had pulled her from the ashes of her humiliation and given her the keys to his kingdom. Her new reality was a dizzying paradigm shift. She was no longer crammed into a grey cubicle, ignored and disrespected. Riker had set her up in a sweeping high-tech command center overlooking the Manhattan skyline. She had a team of 6 junior analysts at her beck and call access to untraceable dark web mainframes and an unlimited budget. But the most profound change wasn't the luxury. It was Riker himself. He was a man of terrifying contradictions. To the outside world, he was an ice-cold apex predator. But with Piona, he was a devoted guardian. He never treated her like an employee. He treated her like a queen. He would often enter her office unannounced, dismissing her staff with a mere flick of his wrist, just to bring her a box of fresh cannoli from a bakery in Little Italy, or to gently massage the tension from her shoulders after hours of screen time. He looked at her body not with disgust, but with a ravenous, undeniable hunger. Whenever she wore her tailored pencil skirts, she could feel his dark obsidian eyes tracking the sway of her hips, full of possessive heat. He made her feel powerful. He made her feel desired. "You are frowning, Mia Bella." Riker's deep voice resonated from the doorway. Piona looked up, a natural smile breaking through her intense concentration. Riker walked across the plush carpet, discarding his suit jacket on a leather sofa. He came up behind her chair, his large, warm hands settling onto her bare shoulders. She leaned back into his touch, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "I am frowning because your enemies are sloppy," Piona murmured, tapping her manicured fingernail against the glowing monitor. "I've been tracing the shell companies managed by my former firm, Derek's accounts specifically. I knew he was laundering money, but I didn't realize how arrogantly he was doing it." Riker leaned down his cheek, brushing against her dark curls. "Show me." He thought he was being clever. Piona explained, pulling up a complex web of transactions. He was moving funds for the Donovan Syndicate through a series of fake maritime shipping companies based in Cyprus. But Derek is greedy. He didn't just launder the money, he skimmed it. He set up a shadow account in the Caymans under his mother's maiden name. For every 10 million he cleaned for the Donovans, He quietly funneled 200,000 into his personal offshore trust. Riker let out a low, dangerous chuckle. The sound sent a shiver down Piona's spine. He stole from the Irish mob. The boy is already a corpse. He just doesn't know it yet. No, Piona said sharply, turning her chair around to face him. Her dark eyes burned with a fierce, newfound authority. You promised me I could ruin him my way. Violence is too quick. I want to dismantle his life piece by piece. I want him to feel the same absolute helplessness he tried to make me feel. Riker looked down at her, his expression softening into an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. He reached out his thumb, gently tracing the curve of her full jawline, dipping down to rest against the soft flesh of her throat. You are magnificent, Riker whispered, his gaze dropping to her lips. Your mind is a lethal weapon, Piona. Tell me how you want to execute him. I have already compiled the unredacted ledgers, Piona said, her heart fluttering at his intense proximity. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, an anonymous, heavily encrypted data packet will be delivered simultaneously to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the IRS, and the managing partners of his accounting firm. But before the authorities can move in, I am going to initiate a master override on his offshore accounts. I wrote a script that will drain his stolen Cayman trust and donate every single penny to an eating disorder recovery charity in his name. By noon tomorrow, Derek Lawton will be destitute, unemployed, and facing 20 years in federal prison. Riker's smile was lethal and breathtaking. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was bruising, passionate, and entirely consuming. It was a kiss that tasted of danger and absolute devotion. Piona wrapped her arms around his thick neck, pulling him closer, reveling in the solid, unyielding strength of the man who had chosen her over every other woman in the city. Make the call, my queen, Riker said against her mouth. Burn his world to ashes. Retribution arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, disguised as a fleet of black tactical SUVs pulling up outside the towering glass facade of Derek Lawton's prestigious accounting firm. Piona watched the live feed from the security cameras she had hacked earlier that week. She sat on the edge of Riker's massive mahogany desk, her legs crossed, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. Riker stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on her thigh, his thumb drawing lazy, comforting circles on her skin as they watched the screens together. At exactly 9:15 a.m., federal agents stormed the marble lobby. On the fourth screen, Piona watched the doors to the executive boardroom burst open. Derek had been in the middle of a presentation, standing arrogantly at the head of a long glass table, surrounded by the senior partners. The audio feed was crisp. Derek Lawton. A senior FBI agent barked, flashing a badge. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Hands behind your back. On the monitor, Derek's arrogant facade crumbled like dry clay. He dropped his laser pointer, his face draining of all color. He backed away, stammering incoherently, his eyes darting frantically around the room for support. There was none. The senior partners, having received Piona's data packet 15 minutes prior, looked at him with absolute disgust. Carter and Liam, his loyal frat boy sycophants, were actively shrinking into their leather chairs, terrified of being implicated by association. This is a mistake, Derek shrieked, his voice pitching high with panic as two agents grabbed his arms, roughly slamming him, face first onto the polished glass table to cuff him. I haven't done anything. I'm a junior partner. You can't do this to me. Save it for the judge, the agent snapped, hauling Derek to his feet. Your Cayman accounts have already been seized. We have your ledgers. You're looking at decades, son. Piona watched as Derek was perp-walked through the open-plan office. The entire floor of employees, the same people who had snickered at his cruel jokes, the same people who had treated Fiona like invisible trash, now stood and watched him be paraded like a criminal. The humiliation was absolute, public, and inescapable. Riker picked up a secure burner phone from his desk and dialed a number. He put it on speaker. Down on the street level, Derek was being shoved toward the back of an armored federal vehicle. His personal cell phone, confiscated by an agent, began to ring inside the clear plastic evidence bag. Agent Rahostor. Riker's voice projected through the phone's speaker, authoritative and chilling. Put the phone to Mr. Lawton's ear. He has one final call. The federal agent, recognizing the encrypted, untraceable nature of the call, and perhaps possessing a healthy fear of the Castellano name, obliged. He held the bagged phone to Derek's sweating, panicked face. "Who is this?" Derek sobbed. "Please, whoever this is, I need a lawyer." "You don't need a lawyer, Derek. You need a miracle," Fiona said, leaning toward the speaker on Riker's desk. Her voice was calm, steady, and entirely devoid of pity. Derek froze on the screen. "Fiona, Penny, is that you?" His voice was a frantic, desperate wheeze. "Penny, please. You have to tell them. Tell them I'm innocent. Tell them you made a mistake with the audits. I'll do anything. I'll pay you." "I'm sorry about the gala. I swear to God, I was just drunk. It was a stupid joke. Please, you have to save me." The sheer audacity of his begging sent a wave of cold resolve through Fiona. He wasn't sorry for what he had done to her. He was only sorry he had been caught. $50,000, Fiona said softly, echoing the words that had shattered her heart 3 weeks ago. "That was the price you put on my dignity." "But your dignity, Derek, it turns out it was worth absolutely nothing at all." "Penny, wait." "Oh, and Derek," Fiona interrupted, a sharp, genuine smile touching her lips. "I hope you enjoy the charitable tax deduction. The eating disorder clinic was very grateful for your generous donation. Goodbye." She reached out and pressed the red button, cutting the line. On the monitor, Derek dropped to his knees in the rain, sobbing hysterically, as the federal agents hauled him by his armpits and threw him into the back of the SUV. The doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. Fiona let out a long, shuddering breath. The heavy, suffocating weight she had carried for 28 years, the belief that she was unworthy, invisible, and inadequate, finally dissolved. She felt light. She felt invincible. Riker gently turned her face toward him. His dark eyes were blazing with pride and a deep, consuming affection. "How do you feel, my brilliant lioness?" "I feel." Fiona paused, searching for the right word. She looked at the man who had seen her worth when the rest of the world had only seen a punchline. "I feel like I am exactly where I belong." Riker stepped between her parted knees, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and pulling her flush against his chest. "You belong with me." He vowed, his voice a low, rough rumble. "You will never hide in the shadows again, Fiona. You are the architect of my empire, the keeper of my secrets, and the only woman who will ever wear my ring." He kissed her, and this time there was no anger, no vengeance, no darkness. There was only the promise of a future built on genuine respect and an unshakable, ruthless love. The city of Manhattan sprawled out beneath them, vast and indifferent. But inside the penthouse, Fiona Hayes was finally unequivocally the master of her own destiny. Did Fiona's epic revenge satisfy your soul? If you loved watching this ruthless mafia boss defend his brilliant queen and tear down her toxic bullies, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that true power comes from the mind. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, dramatic and intensely Ricurtic audio stories. Drop a comment below. What would you have done to Derek? See you in the next video.